Hello and welcome to another in the 10-minute tip series of recorded programs for credit and collection professionals. This program is titled Common Mistakes That Result in Bad Debts. My name is Michael Dennis and I will be the presenter today. Let's begin with an introduction. I think it's fairly obvious for credit professionals that we can either try to learn from our mistakes or we can repeat them. And in particular, in today's presentation, we're going to talk about the types of mistakes that can result in bad debt losses and/or serious payment delinquencies. I think it's fair to acknowledge that bad debt losses are not always the result of errors made by the credit department. In other words, some bad debt write-offs, some losses, are the cost of doing business with customers on open account terms. Why? Because each and every sale made on open account terms carries some risk of either payment delays or payment default resulting in bad debt losses. What's unusual but true is that the idea that there is risk in connection with every open account sale is true no matter how large and how seemingly creditworthy the customer appears to be. In other words, even if the customer is a Fortune 100 company, a Fortune 50 company, a Fortune 10 company, it's a household name. You still have a risk. At a minimum, you have a risk that the customer will pay the invoice late. On a more serious note, you have the risk that the customer, for whatever reason, valid or otherwise, will default on payment and force you at some point to conclude that you need to write off the unpaid balance. There's a risk, in fact, not just in connection with open account sales, but I would argue there's even a risk with accepting COD payments. So let me give you an illustration. Let's assume that in connection with a COD payment, you're willing to accept the customer's check at your dock, at your will call. They're going to come and pick up the products. They're going to hand you a check. They have your products. You have their check. Until that check clears, until you deposit it, until the money is taken out of their account, that COD payment represents risk to your company. Until that check clears, you've offered the equivalent of open account terms to that COD customer for the 1 or 2 or 3 days that it takes from the time that they hand the will call person the check and the check is deposited and then ultimately clears that customer's bank. Introduction continued. In my experience, there is at least one lesson that can be learned from every bad debt write-off. Now, sometimes the lesson to be learned is completely obvious. For example, there could be a scenario in which the credit file that you have is significantly out of date, and but for the fact that the credit file was out of date, the loss in question might have been avoided. Some lessons are more subtle. For example, the due diligence was done correctly, but the decision to extend credit was the wrong decision. So let me illustrate the due diligence was done correctly. For example, in connection with a request for open account terms, the application was received, the new accounts person did what they do. They obtained a bank reference. They contacted the references, the 3 trade references that were listed on the application. They may have pulled a credit report. They may have pulled a credit interchange report. In connection with a requested credit limit, your company may have requested customer financial statements. They may have gotten the financial statements. They may have done the analysis. They may have crunched the numbers and looked at the trends and calculated the ratios and concluded incorrectly that the applicant company deserved open account terms and the credit limit that was requested. And that, unfortunately, happened to be the wrong decision. In hindsight, it was obviously the wrong decision. But at the time, it may have been the wrong decision simply because, based on the totality of the facts, the customer, in this case the applicant in question, didn't qualify either for open account terms, period, or didn't qualify for the credit limit that was assigned to them. So sometimes a loss can be avoided and sometimes the loss could have been lower if the credit limit assigned had been lower. In my experience, an assessment needs to be done each and every time there is a bad debt write-off. We want to do a post-mortem, in effect, an autopsy, to look at the cause, what caused the loss. And that's important, but equally important is to make any necessary changes to prevent similar problems in the future. So, for example, if it is simply the fact that the decision was too liberal, the credit limit was too large, an adjustment needs to be made. If a mistake was made, if the credit analyst, the new accounts person, didn't take a step they should have taken, that issue needs to be corrected. If we ordered the wrong credit report, or we didn't order a credit report, and a credit report would have shown us something that we should have seen and would have wanted to know, because that could have prevented the loss, that's something that we need to know. But we need to do this assessment so that we ensure that we don't repeat past mistakes. Your company's risk tolerance. It is obvious that bad debts are linked directly to the creditor company's tolerance for risk. And in this context, we're referring to risk as the risk of either slow payment or non-payment, slow payment or no payment. In all instances, the decision maker in the credit department has got to be in a position that he or she can weigh the potential reward of making a sale on open account terms against the risk of slow payment or non-payment, and they have to be able to do that consistently. The goal of the credit department is to evaluate and understand the relationship between risk and reward, and then, only then, to determine if the risk presented to the credit department, to the creditor company, is going to be acceptable. My position is that the credit manager, and more generally the credit department, is not in a position to decide how much risk the company should be taking in connection with sales made on open account terms. My opinion is that decision needs to be made by senior management. When senior management has shared its opinion about how much is too much risk, then the credit department's responsibility begins, and its process would be to implement a risk management policy in connection with applicants, in connection with active customers, in connection with collections, in connection with past due balances, in connection with updating credit files and increasing or reducing credit limits, that is consistent with the company's appetite for risk and more generally with its risk management policies. Managing the risk of loss. What's clear is that the credit department can avoid certain credit risks by refusing to extend credit to at-risk, or as referred to here, high-risk customers. However, the idea that the credit department can simply avoid risk by avoiding sales to high-risk customers is simplistic. It is, generally speaking, not a viable option, because many customers in most companies would be classified as high risk. Even if only a third of your sales are made to high-risk customers, even if 20% of your sales are made to high-risk customers, I don't think it's likely that your company is going to be in a position to say to the credit department, yes, please don't sell to 20% of our customers. Please reduce our sales by 20% so we can avoid risks. Because the goal and the role of the credit department is not to eliminate risk, it's to manage those risks, the risk of slow payment, the risk of non-payment. Unfortunately for us, refusing to sell to all or many high-risk customers would reduce sales and profits to unacceptable levels. Therefore, it is both necessary and appropriate from time to time to refuse to extend credit to certain customers and applicants, but this cannot be a broad instruction to the credit department. It simply results in an unacceptable loss of sales and potential profits. Now, clearly, there are specific customers that represent an unacceptably high risk of either payment delay or default. And in those instances, we are in a position where we have to refuse to extend credit. We have to refuse to increase credit limits. We may be in a position in which we have to reduce the credit limit or even withdraw open account terms. The trick, of course, is to figure out for your company what constitutes an unacceptable risk. Generally speaking, this is done using experience and education. And in all instances, determining what types of risk are or are not acceptable needs to be done in consultation with senior management. And one of the ways I recommend to do that is pretty basic. Basically, what you do as a credit decision maker is you discuss from time to time what I'm going to refer to now as close calls. It's close. I don't know. I'm not certain whether or not we should release this order. I'm not certain whether or not I or we as an organization should approve the credit limit requested or should approve open account terms. So those are the close calls. And when you have one of them, my encouragement, if you are not the department manager, is to talk to the department manager. If you are the credit department manager, my recommendation is to talk to your boss. And not to pass the buck. Not to ask them to make the decision for you, but to use the opportunity to discuss the risk as a way of better understanding your company's tolerance for uncertainty. And it's not about the customer under review. It's about the way in which the company or management wants you to handle similar risks in the future. And what ends up happening is over time you develop a clearer and better understanding of your company's tolerance for the types of risks that you are expected to manage. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you would like to learn more about preventing bad debts, please contact the sponsoring association and request information about how to order the entire 1-hour presentation, which is now available on demand. I hope you found the presentation useful. Have a great day.